life being regarded as the means whereby to serve his master, and its ideal being set upon honor. The whole education and training of a samurai were conducted accordingly. The first point to observe in knightly pedagogics was to build up character, leaving in the shade the subtler faculties of prudence, intelligence, and dialectics. We have seen the important part aesthetic accomplishments played in his education. Indispensable as they were to a man of culture, they were accessories rather than essentials of samurai training. Intellectual superiority was, of course, esteemed, but the word chi, which was employed to denote intellectuality, meant wisdom in the first instance, and placed knowledge only in a very subordinate place. The tripod that supported the framework of Bushido was said to be chi, jin, yu, respectively, wisdom, benevolence, and courage. A samurai was essentially a man of action. Science was without the pale of his activity. He took advantage of it, insofar as it concerned his profession of arms. Religion and theology were relegated to the priests. He concerned himself with them insofar as they helped to nourish courage. Like an English poet, the samurai believed, "'Tis not the creed that saves the man, but it is the man that justifies the creed." Philosophy and literature formed the chief part of his intellectual training, but even in the pursuit of these it was not objective truth that he strove after. Literature was pursued mainly as a pastime, and philosophy as a practical aid in the formation of character, if not for the exposition of some military or political problem. From what has been said, it will not be surprising to note that the curriculum of studies, according to the pedagogics of Bushido, consisted mainly of the following: fencing, archery, jujitsu or yawara, horsemanship, the use of the spear, tactics, calligraphy, ethics, literature, and history. Of these, jujitsu and calligraphy may require a few words of explanation. Great stress was laid on good writing, probably because our logograms, partaking as they do of the nature of pictures, possess artistic value, and also because chirography was accepted as indicative of one's personal character. Jujitsu may be briefly defined as an application of anatomical knowledge to the purpose of offense or defense. It differs from wrestling in that it does not depend upon muscular strength. It differs from other forms of attack in that it uses no weapon. Its feat consists in clutching or striking such part of the enemy's body as will make him numb and incapable of resistance. Its object is not to kill, but to incapacitate one for action for the time being. A subject of study which one would expect to find in military education and which is rather conspicuous by its absence in the Bushido course of instruction is mathematics. This, however, can be readily explained, in part by the fact that feudal warfare was not carried on with scientific precision. Not only that, but the whole training of the samurai was unfavorable to fostering numerical notions. Chivalry is uneconomical. It boasts of penury. It says with Ventidius that ambition, the soldier's virtue, rather makes choice of loss than gain which darkens him. Don Quixote takes more pride in his rusty spear and skin and bone horse than in golden lands, and a samurai is in hearty sympathy with his exaggerated confrere of La Mancha. He disdains money itself, the art of making or hoarding it. It is to him veritably filthy lucre. The hackneyed expression to describe the decadence of an age is that the civilians loved money and the soldiers feared death. Niggardliness of gold and of life excites as much disapprobation as their lavish use is panegyrized. Less than all things, says a current precept, men must grudge money. It is by riches that wisdom is hindered. Hence, children were brought up with utter disregard of economy. It was considered bad taste to speak of it, and ignorance of the value of different coins was a token of good breeding. Knowledge of numbers was indispensable in the mustering of forces, as well as in the distribution of benefices and fiefs, but the counting of money was left to meaner hands. In many feudatories, public finance was administered by a lower kind of samurai or by priests. Every thinking bushi knew well enough that money formed the sinews of war, but he did not think of raising the appreciation of money to a virtue. It is true that thrift was enjoined by Bushido, but not for economical reasons, so much as for the exercise of abstinence. Luxury was thought the greatest menace to manhood, and severest simplicity was required of the warrior class, sumptuary laws being enforced in many of the clans. We read that in ancient Rome, the farmers of revenue and other financial agents were gradually raised to the rank of knights, the state thereby showing its appreciation of their service and of the importance of money itself. How closely this was connected with the luxury and avarice of the Romans may be imagined. Not so with the precepts of knighthood. These persisted in systematically regarding finance as something low as compared with moral and intellectual vocations. Money and the love of it being thus diligently ignored, Bushido itself could long remain free from 1,001 evils, of which money is the root. This is sufficient reason for the fact that our public men have long been free from corruption. But alas, how fast plutocracy is making its way in our time and generation. The mental discipline which would nowadays be chiefly aided by the study of mathematics was supplied by literary exegesis and deontological discussions. Very few abstract subjects troubled the mind of the young, the chief aim of their education being, as I have said, decision of character. People whose minds were simply stored with information found no great admirers. Of the 3 services of studies that Bacon gives for delight, ornament, and ability, Bushido had decided preference for the last, where their use was in judgment and with the disposition of business. Whether it was for the disposition of public business or for the exercise of self-control, it was with a practical end in view that education was conducted. Learning without thought, said Confucius, is labor lost. Thought without learning is perilous. When character and not intelligence, when the soul and not the head is chosen by a teacher for the material to work upon and to develop, his vocation partakes of a sacred character. It is the parent who has borne me. It is the teacher who makes me man. With this idea, therefore, the esteem in which one's preceptor was held was very high. A man to evoke such confidence and respect from the young must necessarily be endowed with superior personality, without lacking erudition. He was a father to the fatherless and an adviser to the erring. Thy father and thy mother, so runs our maxim, are like heaven and earth. Thy teacher and thy Lord are like the sun and moon. The present system of paying for every sort of service was not in vogue among the adherents of Bushido. It believed in a service which can be rendered only without money and without price. Spiritual service, be it of priest or teacher, was not to be repaid in gold or silver. not because it was valueless, but because it was invaluable. Here the non-arithmetical honor instinct of Bushido taught a truer lesson than modern political economy. For wages and salaries can be paid only for services whose results are definite, tangible, and measurable. Whereas the best service done in education, namely in soul development, and this includes the services of a pastor, is not definite, tangible, or measurable. Being immeasurable, money, the ostensible measure of value, is of inadequate use. Usage sanctioned that pupils brought to their teachers money or goods at different seasons of the year. But these were not payments, but offerings, which indeed were welcome to the recipients, as they were usually men of stern caliber, boasting of honorable penury, too dignified to work with their hands and too proud to beg. They were grave personifications of high spirits undaunted by adversity. They were an embodiment of what was considered as an end of all learning, and were thus a living example of that discipline of disciplines, self-control, which was universally required of samurai. The discipline of fortitude on the one hand, inculcating endurance without a groan, and the teaching of politeness on the other, requiring us not to mar the pleasure or serenity of another by manifestations of our own sorrow or pain, combined to engender a stoical turn of mind, and eventually to confirm it into a national trait of apparent stoicism. I say apparent stoicism because I do not believe that true stoicism can ever become the characteristic of a whole nation, and also because some of our national manners and customs may seem to a foreign observer hard-hearted. Yet we are really as susceptible to tender emotion as any race under the sky. I am inclined to think that in one sense we have to feel more than others, yes, doubly more, since the very attempt to restrain natural promptings entails suffering. Imagine boys, and girls too, brought up not to resort to the shedding of a tear or the uttering of a groan for the relief of their feelings. And there is a physiological problem whether such effort steels their nerves or makes them more sensitive. It was considered unmanly for a samurai to betray his emotions on his face. "He shows no sign of joy or anger," was a phrase used in describing a strong character. The most natural affections were kept under control. A father could embrace his son only at the expense of his dignity. A husband would not kiss his wife, no, not in the presence of other people, whatever he might do in private. There may be some truth in the remark of a witty youth when he said, "American husbands kiss their wives in public and beat them in private. Japanese husbands beat theirs in public and kiss them in private." Calmness of behavior, composure of mind should not be disturbed by passion of any kind. I remember when, during the late war with China, a regiment left a certain town, a large concourse of people flocked to the station to bid farewell to the general and his army. On this occasion, an American resident resorted to the place, expecting to witness loud demonstrations, as the nation itself was highly excited and there were fathers, mothers, and sweethearts of the soldiers in the crowd. The American was strangely disappointed, for as the whistle blew and the train began to move, the hats of thousands of people were silently taken off and their heads bowed in reverential farewell. No waving of handkerchiefs, no word uttered, but deep silence in which only an attentive ear could catch a few broken sobs. In domestic life, too, I know of a father who spent whole nights listening to the breathing of a sick child, standing behind the door that he might not be caught in such an act of parental weakness. I know of a mother who, in her last moments, refrained from sending for her son that he might not be disturbed in his studies. Our history and everyday life are replete with examples of heroic matrons who can well bear comparison with some of the most touching pages of Plutarch. Among our peasantry, an Ian Maclaren would be sure to find many a Margaret Howe. It is the same discipline of self-restraint which is accountable for the absence of more frequent revivals in the Christian churches of Japan. When a man or woman feels his or her soul stirred, the first instinct is to quietly suppress any indication of it. In rare instances is the tongue set free by an irresistible spirit when we have eloquence of sincerity and fervor. It is putting a premium upon a breach of the third commandment to encourage speaking lightly of spiritual experience. It is truly jarring to Japanese ears to hear the most sacred words, the most secret heart experiences thrown out in promiscuous audiences. Dost thou feel the soil of thy soul stirred with tender thoughts? It is time for seeds to sprout. Disturb it not with speech, but let it work alone in quietness and secrecy, writes a young samurai in his diary. To give in so many articulate words one's inmost thoughts and feelings, notably the religious, is taken among us as an unmistakable sign that they are neither very profound nor very sincere. Only a pomegranate is he, so runs a popular saying, who, when he gapes his mouth, displays the contents of his heart. It is not altogether perverseness of Oriental minds that the instant our emotions are moved we try to guard our lips in order to hide them. Speech is very often with us, as the Frenchmen defined it, the art of concealing thought. Call upon a Japanese friend in time of deepest affliction and he will invariably receive you laughing with red eyes or moist cheeks. At first you may think him hysterical. Press him for explanation and you will get a few broken commonplaces. Human life has sorrow. They who meet must part. He that is born must die. It is foolish to count the years of a child that is gone, but a woman's heart will indulge in follies, and the like. So the noble words of a noble Hohenzollern, Lernet zu leiden ohne Klagen, has found many responsive minds among us, long before they were uttered. Indeed, the Japanese have recourse to risibility, whenever the frailties of human nature are put to severest test. I think we possess a better reason than Democritus himself for our Abderian tendency. For laughter with us oftenest veils an effort to regain balance of temper when disturbed by any untoward circumstance. It is a counterpoise of sorrow or rage. The suppression of feelings being thus steadily insisted upon, they find their safety valve in poetical aphorism. A poet of the 10th century writes, "In Japan and China as well, humanity, when moved by sorrow, tells its bitter grief in verse." A mother who tries to console her broken heart by fancying her departed child absent on his wonted chase after the dragonfly, hums, "How far today in chase, I wonder, has gone my hunter of the dragonfly?" I refrain from quoting other examples, for I know I could do only scant justice to the pearly gems of our literature, were I to render into a foreign tongue the thoughts which were wrung drop by drop from bleeding hearts, and threaded into beads of rarest value. I hope I have in a measure shown that inner working of our minds which presents an appearance of callousness, or of an hysterical mixture of laughter and dejection, and whose sanity is sometimes called in question. It has also been suggested that our endurance of pain and indifference to death are due to less sensitive nerves. This is plausible as far as it goes. The next question is, why are our nerves less tightly strung? It may be our climate is not so stimulating as the American. It may be our monarchical form of government does not excite us as much as the Republic does the Frenchman. It may be that we do not read Sartor Resartus as zealously as an Englishman. Personally, I believe it was our very excitability and sensitiveness which made it a necessity to recognize and enforce constant self-repression. But whatever may be the explanation, without taking into account long years of discipline and self-control, none can be correct. Discipline in self-control can easily go too far. It can well repress the genial current of the soul. It can force pliant natures into distortions and monstrosities. It can beget bigotry, breed hypocrisy, or habitate affections. Be a virtue never so noble, it has its counterpart and counterfeit. We must recognize in each virtue its own positive excellence and follow its positive ideal, and the ideal of self-restraint is to keep our mind level, as our expression is, or to borrow a Greek term, attain the state of euthymia, which Democritus called the highest good. The acme of self-control is reached and best illustrated in the first of the two institutions which we shall now bring to view, namely, the institutions of suicide and redress, of which the former known as harakiri, and the latter as katakiuchi, many foreign writers have treated more or less fully.